Good day, chaps. So our journey through the ranges looking for rare tanks continues today. Along our route we will find 3 comets hidden away, some of which have rather unique features, travel up and over the Ajax range, and down to find the lost tortoise tank, all while fending off the worst of the Scottish wildlife, which was pretty determined to eat us alive. We went past the figure 8 and carried down to the new controlled impact zone. This is a newly developed area that has been purposely built for the Ajax trials, costing around £5 million. It's been established as a new firing at range, for Ajax to attempt to hit something. However, if or when Ajax is cancelled, it will also likely be used for the Challenger 3 trials, which will begin testing at the end of the year. During the clearing and prepping of this site, a private flail vehicle was used to make sure that any unexploded rounds were removed, and to trim back the last 50 years of growth. This required a rather expensive private company to come in, and this price only went up when the flail accidentally found 30 tons of forgotten comet buried under the ferns. Once the expensive flail parts had been fixed, they went on to accidentally find 2 more that day. These comets, dubbed the Three Sisters, were located right in the way of the new controlled impact zone, and would need hauling away. Yet this is not as easy or cheap as you might think, and required a craft to come up from Tidworth, as well as a lot of official paperwork and checks that now needed to be done. In total, the vehicles cost some £40,000 to move the 150 metres or so to the left, and so you can imagine how expensive it could be for any potential customer to try and collect and recover these over 2 miles of ground needed to get them just to the gates. What was keenly discussed was that the days of people turning up and just collecting parts was a thing of the past, as was the notion of using old tanks as hard targets in the future. With these sites being such a treasure trove of protected flora and fauna, the MOD is changing and adapting the way it manages and maintains such areas, and any plans or attempts to remove relics in the future will require considerable amounts of paperwork, assessments, and of course extra costs. All of these comets were gun tanks in their days, however some of them have had a few interesting features about them. The first vehicle might have been the one that was flailed, and is the least intact, with its turret and gun stuck over in a pile. But what's curious about this particular comet is she appears to have only ever had one return roller fitted to either side, with no fittings or even mounting marks for others. Now, some comets, notably the Pilot, didn't have return rollers, but I've never seen one with a single wheel to either side, so perhaps this was a later testing mod. These comets also developed a weird rust pattern on them, which I'm still trying to figure out. At first I thought it might have been hydrogen blistering corrosion, which forms these blisters, this weird warty look that's been found on all these comets, and can be found on other comets on the ranges, but not on other types of tank, so it might be something relating to the steel in these particular comets. But if you do think you know a different idea, let me know below. Moving on, we began to travel down the range. Somewhere about 1 kilometre away was our tortoise, but she was well hidden from view, and so we set out on the next leg of our journey. After going through several gated points, it is here that we met the bane of Scotland. Now, this might not come as a surprise to anybody who has trekked through the Highlands, but Scotland is plagued in the summer months with midges and other biting insects, and it just so happens that some of our vehicles were in the perfect breeding ground for these biting fanatical bastards, and within seconds of coming to a stop there were dozens of them landing all about you, and they have absolutely no fear in their divine purpose of cleansing the land of the English. And these little ones are only determined when the big Scottish horseflies turn up, and these buggers are about the same size as a moderately built badger, and swoop out of nowhere to try and take your arm off with a few well-aimed bites, and they won't stop their attack until they're either killed or you're just left a bloodless husk lying in the road. We did see this centurion stuck out on its own, but in a distinct bog between it and us, and the idea of being eaten alive by insects while sinking into a Scottish peat bog deterred us from going to take any closer looks. And yet, as we rounded the corner, there she was, sitting about 30 metres from the path in the long grass, the only other tortoise tank left in the world, and the main reason for my travels here. This is tortoise P6, believed to be the sixth and final hull made. Now, I'm not going to go over the background of tortoises too much, as we have two videos on the development of tortoise, and I've been collecting documents and background all over the UK for the last 4 years. But basically, of the 25 tanks ordered, only 6 were ever produced, although up to 12 casts were made. Of these, the first pilot, P1, is still at the Bovington Tank Museum. They did have a second vehicle, but they sent that to Lulworth Ranges to be destroyed. The third vehicle was a bit of an enigma, but it did take part of firing trials against Panthers in post-war, while the fourth and fifth were sent out to Germany for trials, and the last one, this vehicle, was more or less sent from the factory straight to the Ranges, or so the story goes. Quite what happened to P6 remains a mystery, as to date a lot of the background is still missing. But it seems from what's left is that the vehicle was delivered as is, with no gun ever mounted, and most of the internal parts were never fitted either. Engine and transmissions are absent, and nothing is left inside, just being more or less a shell. And yet there are a few oddities. It's possible, for example, that the ammo racks might have been fitted, as wooden parts and hinges are left over. Yet these wooden parts may have also come from another vehicle, as P6 was often set on fire to make it a thermal target. On the left-hand side, you can see where the tortoise has taken a real beating over the years. And while no longer a hard target, you can still see the kicking she took. A mix of damage, mostly from 120mm Hesh and APDS and practice rounds, have been punching holes into her and ripped the suspension apart. On the inside you can see the damage done. The APDS has punched cleanly through the hull, but not out the other side, disintegrating on the inner side and leaving a fine silver powder around the place. The Hesh rounds, of which 2 are visible, really show a perfect set of scabs and spool on the far side of the tank. And what is interesting is you can see the various type of shot performance, from ductile hull growth, basically your standard hole, scabbing, edging, and even disking. To the front you can see the remains of the gimbal that held the 24-inch ball socket, which the gun would have been mounted in if she'd ever had a weapon fitted, although there are no other fittings around the place. The beezer mount is still intact and the ammunition port on the side is open, a feature that makes a difference from P1 at Bovington. Popping out the hatch at the top, the cupola having long been shot off and missing, you can see various bits of damage to the plate, but one of the most important marks still remains. The cast stamp and date, FHL 1944. This lets me know that F.H. Lloyd cast this hull in 44, which is great from a research point of view, as the tortoise at Bovington was cast by the English Steel Corporation. An earlier document show that a separate firm was planning on casting these, and so we can see that some changes took place. The rear of the tortoise is also quite unique, as were all tortoises, no two were the same. But the keen observer will notice that the rear hatch has just bolt-on points and no hinge plate, which makes it different from the others, just another tiny little detail. Although the original hatch is missing, so it may never have been fitted. Other important serial numbers are also present on the hull. On the back of the casting, for example, is AT108C. Bovington's, or P1, is AT104D, while P4 had AT108B. Each of these refers to a particular drawing or plan, and each was different. To the right of these are cast numbers which go up to 12, indicating the number of casts made, although it's possible some of these were impure or faulty and smelted down again. On this tortoise, for example, we can see A9. Above each serial was also originally the manufacturer's mark. This was supposed to be ESC, or the English Steel Corporation, and this is visible on some of the pre-production work, but later carved off the vehicles or ground down. It's known that ESC went back on their promise to make and machine the tortoises, and so it's likely the other firms that took over the work simply chipped or ground away their stampings. Further down the side, amongst the suspension, you can see even more serial numbers relating to other parts, in this case AT33. This will again relate to a set of drawings for track and suspension types. It's very unlikely that tortoise will ever be moved, but nor will it be used as a range target anymore. In fact, her sheer stubbornness and weight may well have saved it in the past, when scrap dealers were chopping through dozens of tanks on these ranges, including Comets, Churchills and Conquerors. Tortoise's heavy weight and thick armour prevented the Scrappy from bothering, as it was just too much hassle. Today, her tracks and suspension are mangled on one side and the bottom has given out, with the torsion bars sticking up through the inside. And so moving Tortoise would be extremely expensive and costly, not to mention it would cause extensive damage to the protected ground. She will remain here, hopefully, overlooking the winding paths of the ranges like a big chunky silent sentinel. I sacrificed a tin of iron brew and a small bannock bun to appease the tank's wounded machine spirit, and set off in search of more vehicles. Soon enough we saw more telltale rusty orange things peeking out from under the bushes, and set out to find them. In the next video we'll look at a super rare chieftain tank located next to an irradiated hot zone, as well as Contentious, part of Britain's weird experimental years. But until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you again soon. Toodle pip.